see them muscling in on the cheaper side of the market, but it takes them a lot longer to implement that, and a lot longer to actually move forward with that.
One thing I'd say for that, sorry, is that I think if you are thinking of going into iPhone development, you've got to consider your sort of like your future plan of what you're doing, because in a year's time, the whole ball game is going to change again. A year ago, independent developers could release a small game and it could become very popular and very successful. I think that gap of success is getting smaller and smaller, and especially, as the guy pointed out, with the big guns now coming into the field, that gap's going to get even smaller and smaller because they've got a lot more money to put behind. And so I think if you've got, as an independent developer, you've got to constantly be aware of the shifting sands and be ready to change your tack or your approach to the game that you're looking to release at a moment's notice, just depending on you know, how the horizon's looking.
Absolutely. And just to sort of to follow on from that and talk about, very briefly touch on the actual timelines of development. When you're looking at the iPhone and comparing the capabilities of something like the iPhone against the PSP and the DS, you know, the iPhone shits all over everything else. There's only one aspect of the PSP that is better than the iPhone, as far as I can work out at the moment. We've done a fair amount of R&D on this over the last 4 weeks, and that's how many polys that the PSP can push is way better than the iPhone. But then again, and Neil had an interesting point earlier, you know, people look at the PSP and they're trying to develop a PS2 game for a handheld unit, and that's not what you've got. You can't look at it like that. You know, you need to look at the iPhone as almost a mobile phone with fantastic graphical capabilities and develop it as such. You know, you need to think sort of agile fast. You need to think slightly smaller scale. I mean, that's it. And as Neil says, the gap for that is going to decrease over time. And you know, the bigger studios or sort of mid-sized independent studios are getting onto that bandwagon at the moment. And development is increasing, and these days a full iPhone application is getting into the realms of 6-month development times, if not longer. So we're starting to get into the realms of handheld. But I would say that the opportunities are definitely still there. And it's all about the idea, it's all about the initial spark that you might have to get something out there. Any other questions? So I'll hand over to Neil, I guess, who said he's going to talk about more sort of art side, related stuff. Okay, so basically
my background is an artist, and I was a freelancer for a number of years, and then basically I was working for a bunch of different developers, just contracting freelancing, and I'd be sat there and the producer would come up to me and say, "Hey Neil, do you know anybody that can do front-end UI? Do you know anybody that can model a car?" And I'd say, "Oh yeah, I know this guy, I'll just tap him up on MSN Messenger." And after about 6 months of that, I suddenly thought, "Oh yeah, I could be making some money out of it." So that's when I started Fraction Studios, and basically, you know, as soon as the developer got in touch with me, I'd sort of put a small team together to get a project done. But because we weren't a big outsourcing house, like some of your others, like I'm sure you've all heard of people like Massive Black and people like that, we could never compete with that kind of new next-gen 360 PS3 level stuff. So we concentrated solely on the handheld market, and we had a lot of luck with that, doing sort of Brew Mobile and DS development and stuff like that. And then obviously more interestingly, recently with the iPhone, and we've actually done some work with IronMonkey. We did some work on Need for Speed Undercover, early on, end of last year, which was obviously a really interesting experience. And from an art side of things, you know, we had to up our game really, because we've been doing a lot of DS stuff for quite a long time. DS is, well, to be frank, 3D games on DS don't always look fantastic. as I'm sure you'll agree. I mean, you've got some standouts there, like Grand Theft Auto and Zelda, but on the whole, to get something to look good on DS in 3D is actually quite hard work. And then coming straight to the iPhone, all of a sudden you've got this spangly new bit of kit, and it's almost the other way around. You've got to come at it from a more pure art sort of side of things, and that's mainly down to texture space, because on DS you're dealing with sort of 32 by 32 pixel textures to go on a wall or a side of a building or something. And then on iPhone, you've suddenly got this 1024 by 1024 blank texture page sat in Photoshop staring at you saying, use me, use me. And it's quite daunting. For a good example, I had, when we were doing Need for Speed Undercover, actually we did a few different SKUs of that. I worked on the DS version as well as the PS2 and Wii ones. And I had an artist that I'd been assigned working on the DS version for a number of months. And then when he finished on that, I said, right, we're going to be doing the iPhone version now. And the poor bastard suddenly was thrust into this world of 1024 by 1024 pixels rather than 32 by 32, and it scared the living daylights out of him. Thankfully, he was talented enough to, after a couple of days, and from a bit of cooperation from the art director at iRonMonkey, we were able to get a really good quality and make things look really, really great. So I think from art side of things, if you're thinking of doing a 3D game on iPhone, look at what needs to be done to make a game look great. It's not the same as DS development. You get more textures. It's almost akin to the old Dreamcast way of development. Dreamcast had lots of texture memory. So just kind of make best use of what the hardware has to offer.
So I'm from Firemint. We started back in 1999 and 2003 running into mobile phone games, just trying to give you history. So we didn't actually get onto the iPhone possibly a year ago now. We started on it. People were starting on it, I think it was January last year on the hack versions. I think you remember people cracking the firmware and that's development for that. We didn't start at that point because we were a 30-person company and that wasn't something we could monetize. We don't do free games for a cracked iPhone. So we were waiting until there was a market for it, which there was only rooms at that stage. So at that time we were developing real racing for the N95 with accelerometers, thinking the N-Gauge was going to be the big thing. And it's amazing how much things change in such a short amount of time. So we actually started real racing with the N95 and then switched over to the iPhone, probably was about August last year. And that was only when we started on iPhone because we've been developing on a broad number of platforms like most guys here, because we can't target just one platform because, isn't it, Neil? I think saying that the platform's going to change next year. We've seen it happen so many times over the last year and a half, let alone longer term. So we look at, I suspect, like those guys PSP and XBLA, PlayStation Network, and Zune HD device or whatever's going to come out, and consider how we're going to get our games to work on that as well. So I'm not going to ramble a bit because my preparation was terrible, but on flight control, for example, if because that was a really small development time, that was designed by our CEO just on his week off in January and decided to make a game. He's got 16 years experience in game development, so he's got a fair bit to work with, a bit of experience, so he sort of knows marketing as well, so he kind of knew what he was doing. But when he made that game, one of the things that really, we made this brand of flight control, we made a game that is just for touchscreen, which is really quite annoying. If you can't make that on XBLA, you can't move the PlayStation Network. We've built a brand that only works on touchscreens. Maybe if a tablet PC, or how do you monetize on a tablet PC? So, just one thing to consider when you're making a game. I mean, it's really nice to use accelerometers, and that's the other thing with accelerometers on real racing. Is a lot of devices out there, our engine could port to a lot of mobile phones that game, but they don't know how you sell ROM rigs, and did it.